I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Masters of Controlled Chaos. And this month, we're going to be looking at the brash, sensitive, angry legend of a director, one of the great American directors of all time, John Ford. Now, this one was a really fun one to do for me, guys, because I probably prepared for this episode more than I've prepared for any other episode of Masters of Controlled Chaos. Started to get into the flow of how I really wanted them, spacing them out in terms of I get enough, really a month to explore while also doing old on old. I'm going to get into a lot, definitely into the summer when I have less responsibilities, but this one was a huge one, and one I think it took a lot of work, but I'm really proud of what I learned, and really from just watching his movies and studying his movies, I was able to learn so much about filmmaking and particularly classic movies. And with the next probably 3 or 2 Masters of Controlled Chaos being very much classic live action movies, and me doing this old on old series, I am learning a lot about classic movies, but this was definitely a crash course on a classic film director, which I haven't done too much about. You know, I've done the Hitchcocks and the Billy Wilders and whatnot, but this is a big one for sure. And so really, if you don't know John Ford, he's kind of this really unique director in terms of he's very much a director's director. You know, a lot of directors really liked him, but he wasn't an actor's director. He didn't work well necessarily with actors. He sort of utilized his power, but he worked in this really unique time. I think you have to understand that first before you understand his filmography, which is he worked in the studio system. So he's making about 2 movies a year. So he actually didn't even edit his movies. He just shot the movies and sort of directed the movies on set and then moved from movie to movie and sort of put his name on it. Now, he's a prolific director. He made over 140 films and won the Oscar for a directing Oscar 4 times, which is more than any other director of all time, and I'm not sure if that will ever be beaten. Hard to say, but John Ford, his filmography is sort of split into 2 different paths. There's the westerns, which a lot of people know him for, and then there's the prestige pictures. Actually, a lot of his prestige pictures, I say that because they're just not westerns, and those movies actually win a lot of Oscars. You know, if you look at his 4 Oscars, they won Best Directing for. You're looking at How Green Was My Valley, which is about a coal town. The Grapes of Wrath, which is about, you know, this family that moves from Oklahoma to California, and you saw that last a couple days ago, actually now. With the old on old, I covered the Grapes on Wrath. Interesting episode, check that one out if you haven't. And then The Informer in 1935, about a guy who informs on his friend for a reward and sort of the complications of that. And one else, what did I say? How Green Was My Valley, The Informer. Oh, The Quiet Man, that's right, The Quiet Man. He won in 1952. So he definitely, you can tell, I mean, How Green Was My Valley, The Quiet Man, and The Informer are all about Irish families and Irish people. So you can tell that he is also an Irish immigrant and has that sort of connection to him. So if it's not doing a Western, he's doing those sort of prestige type pictures. And really, my favorite of his movies were the Westerns. I think he's most known for the Westerns, despite them being not these Oscar movies, or, you know, The Searchers didn't even get any Oscars, type of thing like that. That being said, I think that he's known for the Western genre because he's seen as this great American director, and really what makes him different than some of the others, someone like a William Wyler, say, is that he is able to create like this big sort of grandness. It's not epic like Ben-Hur or Ten Commandments, but it's grand. It's and it's operatic almost, but it's not, and it's poetic in a sense, but it's not super sort of I'm trying to reword this right. It's not have like an intimate character piece. It's very much epic with these really unique characters in them, and has very much Capra-esque American morals. And I think that's why he gravitates to the West. It's because it's such an interesting genre. I mean, I didn't know too much about it, but really sort of understanding the genre and understanding different types of movies that it is. I mean, John Ford's career totally spans that. He starts off with making a picture like in 1936, I believe, Stagecoach, which is very much John Wayne putting him on the map. This heroic cowboy, sort of traditional pop culture cowboy movie. And then throughout his career, he starts, and as he gets older, starts becoming a little more jaded, I guess you could say, with the West, and starts to make something like The Searchers, which is what we call a revisionist Western, which I'll get into a little more, no surprise there. But I know a lot of people, when they talk about the West, they talk about the poetry of the West, and that's sort of a confusing term. I mean, some people even, when I talked about Moonlight, it's a poetic film. It's kind of a hard definition to describe, but the best way I would describe is, particularly in the West, is it's a combination of things. It's the lifestyle. It's the idea that the law is not really enforceable. Sort of every man for themselves. It's the wild, wild west. Everything can go. It outlaws, just by definition. Look at these terms that are tied to the West. They're not with stability. And then we see sort of four characters that try to bring stability, like the cavalry, the Civil War that happens in that period. Later on in his films, like The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, the sort of the coming of law into these types of towns and whatnot, or the beginning, the building of these towns. He covers everything to do with the Western. I think the Western is so very truly American. I think you cannot understand the American experience, or sort of the USA as a country, if you don't understand like a few key things, like slavery. I think is huge. Civil rights is super huge, and I think the West is huge, and American Civil War, of course. Like there's these key moments where to understand America today, you have to understand America of the past, like you do for most countries. But I think this is sort of a key moment, and in terms of that poetry, it's the way, not only the sort of lawlessness of it all, but sort of the way people talk as well, the slowness of people talk, the way people live their lifestyles, the very much simple way that is kind of looked back in a sense nostalgically even today, the way that, I wish I could just wake up and, plow the farm and then that's it and that's my day, or get up on a cowboy and sort of ride off and see where my fate takes me, this sort of emptiness. I mean, I think John Ford really gravitates towards this immigrant type experience. He's an immigrant himself, so he either goes back to his roots into those Irish sort of towns or not, or he goes to the West and his vision of the West. The same way someone like Frank Capra sees America in a very much positive light. He does too, but he sees America in the West in that sense of people coming over. There's a huge landscape that's never been explored, this sort of manifest destiny. The last time it's happened in human history, really, if you on Earth, where it's just this open land. I mean, of course, the Native Americans were there, but this is the last time I can remember where someone just completely came over and took over, and they didn't know what they would expect. And we see that sort of clash between, of course, the cowboys and the Indians. Throughout his filmography, he's done so many Westerns. I mean, I know he did 24 movies with John Wayne himself, and directed over 140 films, a lot which are actually lost because he made them in the silent era, and film preservation wasn't that well done back then. But I just think that if you're talking about John Ford, you have to understand that filmography, that the prestige pictures were what they were, and the great movies in there, but I think he's known for that Western genre, and he sort of created every type of Western genre and explored every type of avenue of the Western genre, and he's really an incredible Western director first. So if you want to understand Westerns, you could not watch at least some of John Ford's classic movies. So now let's move over to a trademark of John Ford, which I learned that's a huge standout for me, which is his blocking. All right, so that's really the big standout for me. Looking at just classic films in general, but also John Ford, was that he's a master of blocking. Now, nowadays, because we can move the camera in so many different places, a lot of people don't see a need for blocking, or at least sort of well-constructed blocking, because you can just move the camera there. I mean, a lot of people, if you're looking at something like the Jason Bourne films, they're really quick editing. There's not a sort of classic film history to that. They're sort of creating their own thing, which is great, but there's also, you have to respect the old masters in John Ford. And by blocking, if you don't know, it's how you move people around. So back in the day, filmmakers were always trying to create new ways to experience movies, because they didn't just want to film a play, essentially. They want to make filmmaking and movies a unique medium. So some people use something like the Dutch angle. We see this in something like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari with the German Expressionism movement. Or we see something like the Bugsby Berkeley camera movements, where they're up top, right? And we see sort of this, amalgamation, almost silhouette type figures, and how they morph into shapes. You'd recognize it. But this, John Ford decided to make it dynamic by doing almost a play-like thing, which is but making sure that the camera is the only audience. So he'd make his shots dynamic. So he'd place the camera there, and he'd do very little camera movements, which made them more effective, which we'll talk about later. But he made his camera stay still, and then he allowed for the actors to enter into the foreground, or leave the shot, or come into the shot, and really use people in the foreground, the background, and paint and create things like these great paintings in the West. I mean, really lent itself to that. And I think that's why he, in part, sort of gravitated towards that. But in his other films, of course, he also has some great person blocking. I mean, there's no one ever, blocked by a person unless it's for a reason. And I think there's just unique compositions that he's able to create, if you really study them and see how he moves his characters and how, you know, he does this on the first shot, but his actors, I'm sure, really focused on hitting their marks and making sure they were in the right places to do the right things, because the way people move is really smart, and you can really study in how, even through rewatching, you can tell that this was designed knowing the ending and how to tell us about the characters and body languages and stuff like that, that add to the acting. You know, some people just think what they think of their face, but I mean, so much of acting is the body acting, and then a great director excels at acting if they're able to use that body language and the way people move to more develop their character without us even realizing it. So I'm going to take a great scenario here from Young Mr. Lincoln, a phenomenal film, which is probably my favorite block scene, probably maybe the most flashiest block scene, but if you're not paying attention to it, I mean, blocking's not flashy, but this one's still a great one. So we start off, a little bit of context. I won't spoil the movie, but this is at the end of the movie, where young Mr. Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, played by Henry Fonda, is defending these two men accused of murder. And then a witness comes up and says he saw they did it. And it seems like, oh, case closed, you know, he's about to walk away. So we're at the camera, he's about to walk through the door that leaves sort of the main court area where they do the lawyers get up and speak, because he's about to leave that area to sit back down. So before he's about to leave, he's in the foreground, so he's in about a medium shot, and then you have medium shot, and then you have Lincoln in the left hand of the screen. He is in a full shot, and then you have the court jury in the far back in the foreground. They're obviously in a wide, but they're very much an amalgamation. You can't really distinguish their faces. So then Abraham Lincoln starts to question him, and then sort of gets the "I gotcha" moment, and we've seen in so many courtroom dramas. Now, this is actually a unique thing, because I mean, we've seen this trope over and over again, so you may not think it holds up as well as it does, but this is one of the first times. I mean, this courtroom dramas go back to the Greeks, but this is the first time we've seen it in film, and we see him sort of slowly creep forward and come into more of a medium shot, come into the foreground, sort of intruding on this guy's space as he's sort of telling him that, you know, this revelation. Now you see the court jury stand up in the back. So now we have this really beautifully unique shot. We have the two guys in the middle, Abraham Lincoln and the man. You have the court jury standing up, so they're not being blocked by the two men. So you can just see their medium shots in the foreground. And then we see people coming from different sides of the frame come in, almost like they're pressuring this guy. We see that it was an open shot to begin with a few people, and now it becomes like this 30-person shot as people of the jury and people of the audience sort of closing in, sort of like, what's happening? And then at once he had this open door, he was about to leave, and he just got him, and now he can't go, he's trapped. He has to tell the truth, he has to come out and say that he was lying. And it's a really unique thing where it's John Ford essentially clogs up the screen, how you start off, and he lets this scene play out for 3 minutes without interrupted cut, and just lets it play, and we see the slow creep towards Henry Fonda and these two characters in the center. It's almost like a beautiful painting. I mean, Akira Kurosawa, you know, was once asked in a famous quote that he said, you know, the reporter asked him if he studied any paintings for his movies, and he said no, he just studied John Ford films, because so many of these shots I write in my letterbox reviews that just stand out to me. They're like, wow. Subtle, small shots that you look and I'm like, I pause this, put this as my screensaver. I've done that multiple times, because you have these incredible, beautiful shots and compositions of people, and just a lot of them are in the wide. A lot of filmmakers nowadays will cut to a close to Abraham Lincoln and cut to close to the guy, like sweating. But John Ford lets the scene, for the most part, just play out in a one shot, and have everyone come to him and see those faces and see the tension that it builds up, and it clogs the room. I mean, incredible job. And I think that's why a lot of people misunderstand John Ford in terms of, they always say, oh, his cinematography is beautiful. Yes, his cinematography is beautiful, but in terms of the blocking, you have to give credit, most of that, or if not 100%, to John Ford. He's the one who talks to his actors and tells them where to move and how he wants the camera and where he wants the camera. He is the director. So when a lot of people say it's beautiful cinematography, they're totally neglecting John Ford and his incredible work. And I'm not saying that the cinematographer isn't great, but I'm saying, you know, John Ford didn't have just one cinematographer, and this is in all of his movies, right? So he's definitely the main contributor of that, and I think that's where a lot of criticism and you know, unjust criticism of John Ford comes into, or sort of compliments. They're not complimenting the man himself, who has this beautiful composition. And then another quick trademark I want to point out is his lack of camera movements. Like I said, his just standing still. But when he does use them, they're actually a lot very effective. I'm thinking of in The Informer, if you've seen that movie, where Victor McLaughlin's character is sitting there and he's talking to Frankie, and he's the guy who's about to inform on. This is at the beginning of the movie, and then he leaves, and then we hold that shot on Victor McLaughlin, and then Ford does a slow push in on him, and we see this revelation of, you know what, he needs the money, he's going to inform on him, and then that's sort of leads to the rest of the movie. Or something like in The Searchers, where he sees all these white women who, have been with Native American families, and it's really scary, haunting scene. And then we see this pushing into John Wayne's face, and that's the sort of pinnacle moment. He realized what he wants to do with Debbie once he finds her, which I won't spoil for you, but very interesting character moment. If you've seen it multiple times, you're like, that's the moment. John Ford emphasizes that moment without you really realizing it too much. Still comes as a surprise later on down the movie. And then another trademark is his drama and his comedy. He does a lot of movies that are just comedies, a lot of movies that are just dramas, but he also does both in almost a Shakespearean style of both the drama and the comedy that mix things up. Look at something like The Quiet Man, which he won his Best Director for. That's practically a romantic comedy, which I just find interesting. Of course, like many other directors we talked about, he has frequent collaborators. Actually, a lot of his actors were the same, and we see him just travel from one movie to the next. Some he left on bad notes, some he left on good note. Of course, John Wayne, Henry Fonda, Victor McLaughlin, Ward Bond, Harry Carey Jr. It's just sort of see which of his group of actors would appear in his next movie, and I instantly recognized them. So that was a lot of fun just seeing them pop up in different movies. So let's move over into his best movie, which is The Searchers. Alright, so how can I not pick his best movie, The Searchers? This movie is an incredible movie. It's the first revisionist Western, which if you don't know that term, essentially means sort of the Western that we see a lot now today, which is the idea of breaking down the Western as this heroic figure and looking at him from a more honest perspective. The idea of taking this guy who is seen in something like John Wayne and the Stagecoaches, Cowboys and Indians, that sort of pristine in pop culture of this man who is the heroic guy who will go on to the West and kill people and bang, bang. But this is really looking at the sort of honest perspective, which is that's going to take a toll on you. Just have no stable family life, have no family at all, killing people for a living. There has to be something that drives you, and John Ford really explores that in this movie, which is actually really surprised it got made, because you think of the people. It gets through the Hollywood studio system. People just think, oh, John Ford, John Wayne, Western. Okay, greenlight it. It's going to make money, because if you don't know, John Wayne was one of the most profitable stars. I think the most profitable star of all time. He was always number one in the box office. So this was an easy pick for him, for the studios at least. But what they didn't know was that this was really a brave move from John Ford and John Wayne. Now, I don't know if John Ford has sort of become jaded against this genre or not, but you can definitely see his progression throughout this. And I think with The Searchers, this is this sort of culmination and really the start of a genre that they didn't know. Now, I looked at something like The Hostels, which is a movie I just saw recently, and it's sort of the same thing. It's a revisionist Western, but it's so tired. The genre by now is so tired and drawn out that we've seen it so many times before that I don't really think it did anything new. It wasn't original at all. So I think more of the Western genre, I think it needs to evolve, and I think it is evolving towards, say, something like Taylor Sheridan's Frontier trilogy with the new Western, something like Hell or High Water or Sicario or Wind River. These aren't traditional Westerns, but they're modern Westerns in the sense, of the lawlessness in certain places, like on the Mexican drug cartel, or in Wind River, where it's just this open snowland on an Indian reserve, and what he has to say about that. Or Hell or High Water, with these people being mistreated in these small towns, and sort of cops and robbers, almost in a sense, with that community. It was really unique. So I think that's where the genre's evolving. But let's go back to The Searchers. Now, this is really a turning point in his career and sort of the pinnacle of his career. And not the last great movie he made, but one of the last movies he made, and sort of the peak of his career in terms of quality, for sure. Now, what I love about this movie is the clash between young and old. This is something we see time and time again, but you really see this guy Jeffrey Hunter in Martin against the character of Ethan. Jeffrey Martin is a younger man, and we see him sort of get grizzled throughout the movie, but because it is a long sort of movie about, it's not a long movie in length, but it's an epic movie in terms of Jeffrey Hunter is think like the search itself is like 6 or 7 years. So this man, you see this young boy sort of turn to a man, but we still see him have those young, optimistic morals. He's looking after his sister Debbie because he loves her. Well, Ethan is sort of looking after his sister Debbie as almost a familial code that, you know, because he needs something to do. There's always something that drives him, and he's going to keep on doing it until he finishes it because he has almost nothing better to do in that sense. And that's where I think a lot of people's hang-ups come with the movie, but that's where a strength of the movie comes with me, which is in Ethan's character. If you don't know, Ethan is a 100% racist, which turns a lot of people off, but he's the racist in the same way Travis Bickle's racist. They're both anti-heroes, but they're both our protagonists. Now, I mentioned Travis Bickle, who's from one of my favorite movies of all time, Taxi Driver. What I love about Taxi Driver, which was heavily inspired by The Searchers, I also love The Searchers, which is great to see. The point of classic movies is to see movies that you've seen before that inspired some of your favorite movies, and then see the resemblance and see if you like them too, you know? And this was a scenario too. I really enjoyed The Searchers because I find it so hard to do. Even something with Jake Gyllenhaal and Nightcrawler. It's a movie, these movies are movies where they're anti-heroes. They're a protagonist, but these protagonists are not good people. But by very definition, they're a protagonist, and therefore we want to relate to them. It's a unique phenomenon that we see something even so like in Inside Llewyn Davis, another one of my favorite movies of all time. So I'm gravitated towards this anti-hero, towards this man with conflicting values who we know is a bad man, but he's our protagonist, so it allows us to kind of relate to him and see him and want to see the better sides. And we do see the better sides of Ethan. But ultimately, John Ford gives us the story of a man who doesn't deserve redemption. You want to kick him to the curb, but you can't, because you see the humanity. You see about this guy who ultimately does care. He has a unique sort of aura to him. And I think that this is where a lot of misguided criticism comes from, which is that the film is overtly racist, which it's not. I think a lot of this criticism, you know, some criticism I understand, and you know, I respect your opinion, but I think in this situation, a lot of people misunderstand the movie. I think a lot of people don't get it. John Ford isn't a racist. He's not saying that he's not making a racist tale or whatever. I think that he's commenting on this genre. I think that he's saying a lot about this man, this Western man that he himself has helped popularize in this cowboy type genre, is really a broken man and a very racist man and has a lot of hatred to him. And Ethan himself is a character that's not overt, not subtle about his racism. He is racist and he hates these Indians, and that's why we have the opposite of Jeffrey Hunter, who is hopeful, who is not a racist. You know, he's part, or if not all, Cherokee, which is obvious with his darker skin tone, but he is a character that allows them to be the sort of contrast, like I said, that the difference between the young and the old. And I think that really the heart of this movie is this fascinating character of Ethan with this unique moral code. He is our protagonist, but he is a racist, and he does these things, and we're almost the Jeffrey Hunter characters where we're along with him and we can't crack him. But then I think it goes into what I interpret of this movie, and that's how movies are. It's what you interpret. How would I interpret in terms of this man who John Ford probably was in the sense of the directing, and how he directed, and maybe even how he raised his children, I don't know, but the tough love sort of father who, you know, we see Ethan, he doesn't say a word to him, almost, you know, is mean to this Jeffrey Hunter guy for 5 years, and then one day says, I'm writing you into my will, you get everything I own. And it's like, what? You haven't talked to me, you haven't been nice to me, I don't like you, I don't want your stuff. So it's kind of this old, hardened man who clearly has love but can't display it. And he's a man that doesn't deserve redemption, but because he's our protagonist, we want to give it to him. He's making a commentary on this lifestyle that he helped popularize, and I don't think this movie is racist. I think that he's commenting and making this film a commentary on the racism of these characters, and I think some people don't want to look at it, and sometimes it's challenging, it's difficult, because it's not a likable character. And I think that if you don't like these kinds of movies, you have to start at least trying, because you have to challenge yourself in film. Sometimes it's easy to always have the great whippy, you know, quippy protagonists, but seeing these protagonists that are broken, that are troubled, that are definitely wrong people and not good people, but that are your protagonists, I think that you have to challenge yourself and really work on making sure that you understand film. And I think it's a key moment to understanding film, and The Searchers is one of the most key westerns I've ever seen. I think it's maybe the best western I've ever seen, so I highly, highly recommend The Searchers. It was almost my favorite. Another thing I want to point out with The Searchers is that even the character of Ethan's not the main part. I mean, a lot of people also have criticism of the comedy and the drama. They think it's a mix of things, and I think that's kind of misguided too. This movie is very much Shakespearean-esque. I mean, you could understand, you don't understand the comedy or don't like the comedy. I mean, I get that, but I think that a movie like Hostels, which I've mentioned before, fails because not only does it not say anything new about the Western genre, it also is so dark and grim. There's no hope, despite the character being on a hopeful journey, but having a hopeful arc, a changing arc. This movie doesn't have a changing arc really at all. It's just sort of a journey, almost. It's an event. And I think that you have to have these comedies because you have this really stark, commentary, racist, brutal, harsh film in their search. But then you have to have the comedy with Martin and Vera Miles, her character, and Miss Laurie, that's it, and their relationship, and the idea of hope and love, and that the search goes on because there's a potential of Debbie, loving Debbie, because there's hope that they can get them. And I think that's what the comedy brings them. This thing of, here are the good times, this is what the good times can be. It gives you a carrot on the end of the stick, for lack of a better term, before trying to keep on going with that search, and not just being a cold, harsh, dark searchers movie. There is some comedy because it reminds you of the hope, and I think that's a great moment, and I really enjoy those moments as well. Plus, a lot of the comedy starts in the bit. I mean, there is this wedding scene that some people don't like, but it goes on for maybe a little too long. Maybe it's a little indulgent. There are some problems with The Searchers. It's not a perfect movie. That being said, I think it's an incredible movie. I think everyone should watch it. And personally, I'm a big fan of it. It's one of those movies where, like Alfred Hitchcock to Vertigo, you can't separate those two. You can't separate The Searchers from John Ford. It's so much in one of the most personal movies ever made. Not the most personal, but one of the most personal in terms of a career retrospective, very unique film. But that's my best. But it's not my favorite, because my favorite is The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. So, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, in my opinion, and sort of widely regarded as Ford's last great movie, it's just a great performance of these three titans of film in Lee Marvin, John Wayne, and James Stewart, bringing together in this incredible culmination of these three actors in this incredible movie with a very unique performance, and really expertly made by John Ford. And I guess what I really enjoy about it is the performances, but also what it asks of the characters. And sort of the audience, really, by asking the characters, they're asking the audience. There's these incredible, deep moral questions about politics, about sort of morals, and it's the idea of conflicting morals at the end of the day. I mean, you have sort of the good and the bad of the West in bad Lee Marvin and the good John Wayne, but then you also have a third party now, an interesting person in James Stewart, who is this young sort of lawyer who came in and wants justice. This man, he got beat up, he got his stuff stolen, and he says, you can't do that. That's against the law. This country has a law, and I'm going to enforce it, essentially. Because in this law, I mean, they're so stuck in their values. It's very poetic in the sense that Ford, with the man so obsessed with westerns, is now one of his last movies, sort of saying how the western genre is dead. It's over. People are coming in. He's seeing this, exploring sort of the last part of the western, which is the end of it. And I thought that was such a unique concept and interesting movie. It's always engaging, particularly with those performances, but really the relationship between those people and how the relationships between one another. Of course, you have sort of the love triangle between John Wayne, Vera Miles, and James Stewart, and their relationship there. And then you have incredible scenes, like when, like the relationships where you start off with Lee Marvin, who ransacks James Stewart's character, and then James Stewart is now mad at him, so he's going to come back at Liberty Valance, and then you have then there's a confliction between John Wayne and James Stewart over Vera Miles, but then ultimately John Wayne protects James Stewart over Liberty Valance, and then you have the rivalry between Liberty Valance and John Wayne. I mean, this is incredible sort of wave that the three come together, and then the incredible shootout that happens. But what I really love about this movie, and I'm surprised I haven't said it on the top, and one of my favorite moments in a while, I really, really enjoyed this moment. It's the beginning of the movie. Now, there are some incredible shots at the beginning of The Searchers, or the beginning of The Long Grey Line with the men singing. This is still an incredible scene in which we see James Stewart. We don't know anything about the characters. We just know him and his wife are coming back to a town because a man has died, a man that they knew very well, and a man who went by a new name and sort of changed his life. And they're in old makeup, but when they come to the town and they see John Wayne's friend who's still alive, and they sort of, there's a warm embrace, and they're like, wow, we remember this place. It was almost such a nostalgia that I felt for those characters. There was so much history that had happened, that was about to unfold, that they're about to tell you about, that had happened there, that you can instantly feel within 5 minutes. I mean, one of the best scenes ever, because he puts you into this world where there's so much history, and you can feel the history. It's palpable. The way James Stewart and Vera Miles understand this moment, it's like, wow, it's like they're going back to a place that this must have enough connection to them. I want to know more about this movie. It instantly got me in from the beginning. What an incredible opening sequence that I hope to do. I mean, there's so many movies where they go back to the place and they're like, oh, wow, yes. Now, a lot of movies, they start off in that place so that the audience has that feeling. John Ford doesn't start off this place. We don't know anything about this place, but their enthusiasm about this place and the history and their life that's about to unfold in front of our eyes was so passionate and so well done that I felt passion towards that as well. It was a very unique phenomenon that I felt that John Ford was able to construct in just a few minutes. I mean, what an incredible opening few minutes. Even if you don't want to watch that movie, watch a few minutes. I challenge you not to stick around and hear James Stewart's story of the man who shot Liberty Valance. Now, I'm not going to do an underrated this episode because it's hard to say what's underrated because I've seen a bunch of John Ford movies, and do I do it based on top 10 lists? I mean, in that sense, maybe The Informer or Rio Grande was a great John Wayne performance, but I don't know. I'm not going to do any one particular because, you know, why would I do The Informer? He won Best Director for it. So Rio Grande, I guess, would be my pick, but I'm going to leave that because this episode's running maybe a little too long. Anyways, this was such a fun episode. I'm grateful I could talk about this and explain my thoughts on The Searchers and sort of dismiss maybe some criticism about the movie. I think you should watch it. I still think it's a phenomenal movie. If not, I guess the safer pick is The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, an incredible movie that totally stunned me that I had not seen until I did this episode, which is always amazing to see. And understanding the master that is John Ford. I didn't understand him at the beginning, but once I saw a couple of movies, I was like, okay, I think I get this guy. I think I get why so many people love his filmography and understand a director. And that's why I love doing these things, which is understanding a director and his tics and what makes him unique and his different stuff. So next week, I don't know what's going to come out next week for Old on Old, but next Masters of Controlled Chaos is not set in stone, but I think I'm going to start to work on Akira Kurosawa. Let me know in the comments down below if you'd like to see that, or if you'd like to see another director I haven't covered in Masters of Controlled Chaos. If you like the video, comment below. Let me know some of your favorite John Ford movies, if you've seen them. If you like the Western genre at all, let me know. But until next time, I'm gonna roll, and stay tuned.